Alright, Annex A, Allied Deployment and Movement System, or ADAMS. Introduction. The Allied Deployment and Movement System is an element of logistic functional areas and service of the principal objective of the ADAM. Allied Deployment and Movement System is to allow Allied national military staff to carry out the deployment planning, monitoring, exchanging of all related data in the clear and will understand the common format. It also allows nations to provide the force of the NATO operational report force of the equipment, the characteristic movement of the routes denoted with the schedule, the support, and the transportation asset of the standard format, and facilities in rapid preparation to confliction and the dissemination deployment plans between the nations. The national command during the deployment executes in the Allied deployment and movement system is used to monitor the progress and deployment disseminate the deployment information. Multiple national plans underdated. The aid of the documentation is described in general responsibility for the use of the Allied deployment and movement system for the planning and the monitoring and evaluation strategic plan. It also described the Allied deployment and movement system for the deployment planning process is laid up and down in the Chapter 3 with the base of the Strategic Command guidelines for the operational planning of the use of the Allied deployment and movement system. The movement and transportation planning agreed with the NATO and peace Partnership for Peace nations as well as the nation and NATO headquarters of the annex include the information regarding the responsible data management, the detailed procedure for the Allied deployment and movement system operators can be found with the Allied deployment and movement system handbook published from the NACO or the National CIS Operating Support Agency. Movement and transportation policy regarding the use of the Allied deployment and movement system, the MC 336-2, the states of the NATO nations are to use the Allied deployment and movement system with the NATO planning of the for the facilitate multiple national deployment planning transfer information further to be viable. The communication automated the data processing ADP must be provided with the NATO commanders timely information concerning the status of the force deployment, line communication availability, transportation resources as the Allied deployment and movement system of the NATO tools for the multiple national movement and training planning of the nations are continued support for the use of the Allied deployment and movement system and communicate with the movement and transportation data. The NATO has agreed to support the development of the Allied deployment and movement system to maintain integrity of the associated database. The description of the Allied deployment and movement system. Allied deployment and movement system inherently consists of the data management, planning, and analysis and tools that enable the movement and transportation, develop and evaluate the deployment, the sustainment plan of the Allied deployment and movement system. Tools interact with the common of the LOGFAS, which is the logistic functional area system, and the log base. Is where the deployment related with the stored retrieve the Allied deployment and movement system transport tools have described in the following paragraphs. The force management module is used for creating and modifying the force profile, the deploying planning profile directly contained with the specific grouping used and needed to the specific purpose of these force profiles can contain the details, organization, troop, equipment, and supply packages for each of the unit. Additional with the statement of the requirements as for given the operational plan with the imported with the Allied deployment and movement services via the FTM, which is probably the force data management module. This is used in the profiles of the statement of requirements to create the Allied national disposition list. The transportation asset manager tool is used to manipulate the transportation information stored in the log base for the use of the deployment planning through the transportation asset data manager. The user can view and add to the library of different types of vessels, aircraft, railway, wagons, trucks, and buses. The library can also contain details for the performance, capability, usable dimensions for each of the type of the asset. The transportation asset data manager is also created to the national transportation asset list of the containing potential assets to be used in the support given the deployment. The geographical manager module is used to manipulate the geographical data stored in the log base. The GeoMan is used to make the maps and that can be coordinated with the Allied deployment and management movement system planning tools that enables the user to link with the movement and transportation information such as airport and seaports with a specific geographical location. Geographical manager mode module is enabled the creation of lines of communication networks for the air and sea railroad and road movements. It's possible for the deployment of the line of communication include the geographical locations that are not in the current Allied deployment and movement system database. This is important. These geolocations are reported by the nations who add the database to the shape of the Allied movement coordinated century. This is needed to the geolocation of multiple national movement. The transportation planning is the same. The Allied movement coordinated with the century distributes the common geographical as in the AA code for all national Allied deployment and movement system planning cells to ensure the consistently geolocation of multiple national detailed deployment plans, and the geographical manager module has the functional into app location to accomplish the exporting and importing of the geological locations. Through the deployment planning process, the deployment planning of the module is used to build the detailed deployment plans and multiple national detailed deployment plans. The deployment planning module uses the information of the Allied disposition list and the national disposition list, nation disposition list, which is developed in the force deployment module, and the information related to the time and the mode of the transportation to be selected for each of the units of the desired route from the home base to the final destination. During the process, the forces are split into the movement of components tailored to the most likely mode of the transportation. Detailed movement of schedule with the timing of the line of communication, point of embarkment and disembarkment, including the line of communications, are associated with the component movements of the deployment planning module. It makes use of the information created by the final force deployment module and the transportation assist asset damage manager and the geographical management module. Although planning, sustaining, and is not a responsibility movement of the planner, the detailed deployment plan should be also included with the deployment requirements sustainment stock. Planning of the sustainment can be supported with the sustaining planning module using information with the national disposition list and the sustaining planning module. Using the information from the national deployment list and the sustaining planning module can support the logistic planning with the calculating requirements on resupply, indicating quantities, packaging, time, etc. The deployment display module is used to assist the planners analyzing the conflicting of the deployment display module. The visual display of the movement of each of the component with the deployment display module allows the planner to visualize planning requirements for the handling of the tonnage, passengers, and assets, each of the movement of the node. The deployment display module also provides the selection tools for the queries, reports, charts with such information with the prior of the point of embarkment and detail with the information of the unit of the movement schedule. Finally, the general deployment module (GD) is used to simulate the deployment of the forces flow through the sustainment of the joint operation area, indicating when shortfalls or lift might occur. With the simulation show off the point of the congestion might develop and the impact of the force closure would be the force. The process enabled the movement of planners to check the feasibility of the detailed deployment plan, to identify the potential bottlenecks of the deployment plan, to compare the various movements options to assess the transportation resource utilization. During the placement, the national plans changed to update the center of the Allied movement coordinated with the century. Multiple national detailed deployment plan will update and posted with the Allied deployment and movement system website forward with the agencies without the Allied deployment and movement system website access to the other. Data management. The log base for the Nato federal database system provides the service of spanning multiple geographical distributed databases as opposed to the single central database. The log base uses the single in the format and identical with all local databases. And like the distributed database system, presume every site is under the control of the central database administrator. The log base supports substantial level of the autonomy with each of the consistent sites. On the other hand, it allows the collaborative planning across the independent sites and consistent with 9 data clusters, geolocational national infrastructure force on plans, logistic planning force with the supplies of the transportation assets and moving the data in management and principal local autonomy. The data is maintained locally relevant with the allied deployment and module movement system. Nodes, the local database and administrator is responsible for the corrective timeliness of the national data. However, the data structure, certainty, data elements, geographical parameter, and should be identical to common in all the participation planning process of the multiple national coordinated nation. Shared in data to meet the system and integration and interoperable object of the master data shared with the data elements, geographical location, parameter data, etc. should be established and is maintained by the strategic command level of the ACO or the Allied Command Operations responsible for maintaining and coordinating with the shared data across the functional areas as well as the functional area system. Implementation of the database should be dependent on the establishing common data dictionary, standardized data elements and control system with the enforcing of the standards. Data access rights. Each of the nation will maintain national specific database. National database are not identified for that, but the multiple national movement of the relevant national information may be responsible for the NATO headquarters responsible for the movement coordinated with the responsible NATO headquarters cannot release the information to other participating nation, multiple nation agencies, nor using the other purpose of the permission. Originating NATO nation will need to know principles will be observed at all times. Data communication. During the planning of the phase of deployment, rapid data communication capability required between the planning of the nation responsible for the NATO headquarters during the execution phase of the rapid data communication capability between the monitoring nodes and the joint of operation and necessary for the near real timing requirements of the movement updated data, the security with the NATO headquarters, the security classification of the shared data may be up included. The NATO secret data will be maintained, handled in accordance with the NATO National Security Directive. Data maintenance and distribution and configuration control. Data maintenance. The Allied Command Operations Central Authority storing requesting provided with the maintained common and shorted data that maintains the contents of the master data to serve as the reference library for all Allied data, Allied deployment and movement systems users. The update of the database for regular geographical data and deployment area of one of the used on more than one nation maintained distributed centrally with the Allied Commander Operations. Data manager. The allocation of the location the prefix AA. Data distribution. Centrally maintained data distributed with the relevant Allied deployment and management system and movement system used directly with the custodians of the data may be exchanged between the planning authorities as necessary. Normally, the preferred method of exchanging data is via the secure network. The table 1 below the summarizes the data management responsible for the various planning authorities used can be maintained their own set of data and local studies in all areas except for the categorization cluster. In table 1 with the source as defined with the provided with the data and custodians with the custodian the maintainer the distributed with the data the subscriber is at the end of the use of the data. The term responsibility planning authority is used to describe the general term the user, which could be the participating nation, NATO headquarters, or agency, a civil organization responsible role in deployment. Data management, task, and responsibility. See Table 1, sending nations deployment submission, updating the national detailed deployment plan of the Allied deployment and movement system format with the forces involved with the exercise, operation, deployment, and maintenance of the Allied deployment and movement system data required for the log base. 3. Contribution to participation in all strategic planning of the planning for operation exercises necessary to the nation participating in NATO operations that do not have the access to Allied deployment and movement systems are nevertheless still required to submit their detailed deployment plans into the ATOM format. To accomplish this, they should seek the assistance with the wider Allied deployment and movement system community. Host nations are requested to provide data concerning their national infrastructure. Lead nations develop and submit with the updated detailed deployment plan, data plan for the format with the forces, headquarters, and within the lead nation responsibility updated the movement of data for the task within which the lead nation is responsible. 3. Develop and maintain Allied deployment and movement system data required in log base. Allied coordinated command operations coordinated with the conflict prior towards the national detailed deployment plan, combining with them into the multiple national detailed deployment plan, distributed monitoring of the multiple national detailed deployment plan in accordance with the NATO commander's priorities coordinator with the nations and developing and maintaining Allied deployment and movement systems data required in the centralized log base. Table 1 is a management responsibility. 9. Responsibility of the NATO support organization. NATO constellation control of the communication agency provided with the Allied deployment and movement systems, user update, user support, inter-Allied developing software prototypes to meet the movement and transportation information management requirement of NATO CIS Operations Supporting Agency, or NACO SA, integrates and maintains the Allied Deployment and Movement System and software module procedure distributed with the NTA, NATO Constellation Command and Control Agency. Developing Allied Deployment and Movement System prototype for the user, providing technical support to the user, and planning to conduct Allied Deployment and Movement System training, and developing Allied Deployment and Movement System training documentation. This page is intentionally left blank. Appendix B, bilateral arrangement for cooperative use of the airlift in sea.